concussion. The context of this is incredibly important. It comes 4 days after he took this hit in a game against Buffalo on Sunday and then very noticeably stumbled multiple times while trying to return to the huddle. He was then evaluated for a concussion. He returned to that game. They said it was a back injury that caused him to stumble. Now we bring you again to last night, and his top receiver is being asked after the game about the injury.
Emotional, knowing the guy for so long, playing with the guy for so long, you see him go out kind of in the worst way on the stretcher. So a lot of emotions go through your head, but I wanted to go out there and continue to play for him.
You want to win the game, but, obviously you want to make sure that your brother is all right, man, because, football, I feel like, football is just our part-time job, so that brotherhood is something that's going to last forever, man.
Robert Griffin III is among so many of our colleagues and friends that we heard from on Twitter last night, in which he wrote, Tua is a case of NFL teams having to protect players from themselves. Tua is also a case of NFL players needing to be protected from their NFL teams. The bottom line regarding Tua is life is bigger than football. Teams should always put the person before the player, health before competitive advantage. Putting Tua out there isn't just a player safety issue, it's a quality of life issue. And I do have in our conversation this morning here, not only Sam Acho, who was the VP of the Players Association for many years, but Dominique Foxworth, whom you see regularly here with us. And Nick, your extensive experience with the Players Association, I think, is important. When we talk about the Players Association looking to do a review of the way Sunday was handled, Shefty just told us that the interviews on that were scheduled to begin today because of the short week the Dolphins were facing. That in and of itself feels as though it is an illustration of one of the problems in all of this. So as you have reflected on all this morning, Nick, what are your thoughts?
Well, I appreciate everyone who's celebrating the examples of coaches and organizations who have stepped up, but I think it's a mistake to expect that the solution to this problem is filling all the roles with virtuous people. That's going to be impossible. People are people, and they're going to be motivated by the incentives that motivate them. So the way that you fix these things is more power, frankly, and processes through the union. No one grows up saying, when I grow up, I want to be a part of the NFLPA. You say, when I grow up, I want to play in the NFL. But the PA is why you get the money that you get. The PA is the reason why players are safer now than they were in the past, and they're still not safe enough. And as for last night and what we're all doing today, I think it's important to hold the league accountable and to point out what they're doing wrong. But I think it's also important for us to be honest with ourselves with what we are being offended by. So when you think about plays like this and big hits, it's something that a few years ago we all celebrated and we would laugh at and we would be excited and say people got jacked up, and we all know it's true. And it's part of the reason why I wanted to play football is because it was so physical and so dangerous and whatever. It made me feel like even when I was a little boy, it made me feel like what I thought a man was supposed to be. And all that stuff is intertwined in this. But I think that we need to be aware that while what we saw last night was ugly and we should be upset about it, that every single weekend players are getting closer to some version of a future that we are not happy and we don't want to see. So Dave Duerson, Junior Seau, Andre Waters, Javon Belcher, who shot his girlfriend and then shot himself in the Chiefs parking lot. All these people were not quarterbacks, and we do not have a history of big knockout blows that we saw these people take. They largely were defenders. But the point I'm making is all the subconcussive episodes are dangerous too. And we watch this every weekend and we don't get up in arms about that. Those are the things that impact us. We need to understand that we are also, as much as we want to address this game, correct this game, and I'm just as guilty as everyone else. We're complicit and supporting and watching this and knowing that there is no perfect solution to reducing that, because as long as you're exposing people to repeated head trauma, which that's what football is, frankly, it's repeated head trauma. For certain players, it's every single play. And I think we should be aware of that, and we can't shy away from it. So I'm not saying we shouldn't be upset about what happened to Tua last Sunday and what happened to Tua last night, but we need to also understand that we have no reason to believe that those big-time hits are any more dangerous than doing it every single play, which is what a lot of players are doing. And lastly, I just wanted to, it feels like we're piling up on football and on the NFL, which is fine, but there's so much value that I got from football as far as like learning to work together and all that stuff. That's important, but the money too. So like my kids go to a much better school than I ever could have imagined because of football. My parents live in a better neighborhood and they go on vacations when they want to because of football. All of this stuff happened because of football. And I bring that up to say that as a player, you are not thinking, and it's almost noble to be like, all right, yes, I'm exposing myself to this. And I don't care what happens to my body because I know that my kids will be better off and their kids will be better off. My family will be better off. Like my wife is allowed to be a full-time parent, dedicate her life or much of her professional life, which she's a lawyer. She's much smarter than me, more talented than me. She could do so many other things. But because I played football and made a good amount of money, she's allowed to dedicate much of her life to raising our 3 children. These are all luxuries that were afforded to a little black boy from Baltimore County who had very few other really impressive skills other than running really fast. Football gave me the opportunity to do all that. So I am completely comfortable with the trade-off that I made because right now that trade-off physically is a reconstructed knee, a hip surgery. That's fine. But as I get older and if other things start to show up and there are other issues that happen, I'm not so sure that I'll feel as good about that trade-off then as I do now.
That's very powerfully said, Dominique, and I think we all appreciate it. And Chris, I could see you shaking your head along as he was speaking. I think that this is a sentiment, what he has just given voice to, not the specifics, but the overall picture of it is something that I think most football players can relate to, and it certainly seemed to me that you did.
No question about it, and I think that players are aware of the risks that come along with the violence that's associated with the game. But there are players that just don't care about it. To Nick's point, they look at it as a vehicle to get not only themselves, but their family out of whatever circumstance that they're in into a better life. And that's why I think the guardrails have to be in place to make sure that you protect those players from themselves. And that's why we also have to acknowledge the fact that there was a systemic failure when it comes to what happened with Tua. And I love the game of football. Everybody on this panel right now loves the game of football. And what frustrates me to no end is the fact that when you have an incident as ugly as what happened last night and the speculation around what happened with week 3, football all of a sudden comes under fire. And it gives fodder to the crowd that thinks that we need to abolish this barbaric sport when it can teach so many great things like leadership skills, communication. Oftentimes, Greeny, I say, I wish our country worked like a football locker room because people from all kinds of backgrounds, all kinds of religious creeds are able to find a way to come together and work toward a common goal. And the unfortunate part about that is that gets lost when you see what happened with Tua, knowing that the Miami Dolphins and the NFL had personnel in place to guard against this very thing. That's the part that's frustrating, Greeny, and there's a reason why, and I said this earlier, it's not a coincidence that since 2008 till now, youth participation in football is down 39%. Mm-hmm. Because the NFL has tried to project this image that we care about concussions and brain injuries and making sure we protect the players, but then you have incidents like what happened with Tua last night that undermine those efforts and their overall credibility when it comes to player safety.
Sam, I saw you writing some notes down there. What would you like to share?
So I was speaking to a high school yesterday in Minnesota, and I was talking about what it means to be bold and to be courageous and to be vulnerable. And as I'm sitting here thinking, and of course it's us here, but I forget, like people are watching, like the bold thing for not just Tua, but his teammates, the coach, Mike McDaniel, the doctor, like the bold, courageous thing would have been like to say, you know, I'm not going to play. Like after that hit, like I know doctor wants to put me back in, but it's like, you know what, as a doctor, Tua, this half you set out. Right? It's vulnerable because it's like, no, you're supposed to be this warrior. And Nick makes a great point. This is this noble cause. Football has done so much, right? It's taught me how to show up. Football's taught me how to sacrifice for others. I don't want to wake up at 6 a.m. and I was in Bristol last night. I didn't get here till 1 a.m. watching the game, I didn't want to, send it. I don't want to do all these things. But because I'm a part of a team, I do it. So football does teach a lot. But there's another thing that needs to be taught. It's this idea of what does it mean to really be authentic? Really to be like there was a time, my second last year in the NFL, I had just torn my pec. I was out for the season, and my coach was like, hey, man, this is great because you can be this new coach on the field, and it's going to be great, and all these things. It was like the 4th game of the season. Mind you, we had just had our 3rd child. Wife had some complications. Like there was a lot going on in life. I wasn't doing well. But instead of me saying that, I was like, no, coach, I'll be there and I'll watch the tapes. And so like I was at home while the team was playing. I'm at home watching the Patriots because that's the next team we played, trying to get little tips and stuff. And I was miserable. I needed some time. I was hurting emotionally, physically. Like I just signed this big contract and now I'm hurt. And I actually got a chance to talk to a counselor, right? I was talking to like a counselor, like, dude, what do I do? And like life stuff. And he was like, what if you just told your coach what's going on? You're laughing, right? Because it's like,
wild.
What, you mean tell my coach?
A wild concept, yeah.
That's a wild concept. So honestly,
honest
dude, the next day, I went up to my coach, Brandon Staley. He's the head coach of the LA Chargers now. Like, we're still tight to this day.